Hi there, welcome to An Abundance of Books. Today we're going to be going over everything that I read in December. I wasn't planning on doing a December wrap-up, but I figured everything would be covered in my stats video, like it's all there, but I have some things to say. Lots of really interesting stuff this month, so I just wanted to chat about it. I read 10 books in December, and I wanted to go through these in a weird order, as you always do. So we're going to start by talking about all the Christmassy books. First up is Christmas Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella. I ended up really enjoying this one. It's got lots of great British humor. It's just the right level of festivity for me. It takes place over about a month, all prepping for Christmas. The whole family is really engaging, and I think this is something like the 9th book in the Shopaholic series, but you definitely don't have to have read all of the ones before. There's like characters mentioned, but it's her husband and her sister, who I assume have been talked about in other books, but like you understand the dynamics anyway. The main character, Becky, is a little bit vapid and unlikable, but you understand where she's coming from, and she definitely grows on you throughout the book. I thought it was a really solid holiday read. As someone who is not a very festive person, it was right up my alley. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Wrapped Up in You by Talia Hibbert. I've read all of the Brown Sisters books by Talia Hibbert. I think this is the only other thing that I've read. And I thought that it was good. I think that it being so short, like 100 pages, was the biggest problem with it. But that being said, like, I flew through it. It's about these childhood best friends who are coming back for Christmas as adults. Both of their families stay in a house together, and he has been in love with her forever, so he's finally going to make his move this Christmas. And the girl is dealing with a lot of stuff, some fallout from her divorce, and she isn't really sure what she wants to do with her life, how to handle relationships. It's good, but it's kind of the same conversation over and over again, where he's like, I like you, and she's like, but meh. That's basically it, meh, the whole time. But I really enjoyed the writing, and I liked the characters. The boy is basically Chris Evans, so if you want to read a 100-page Chris Evans fanfic, where the sex scene is only in the epilogue, which is a choice, then this might be the one for you. I gave it 4 stars. I don't think it's like on the same level as some of my other 4 stars, but for a 100-page book, like, it provided me with a fun afternoon. I had a good time. Then I read A Boy Called Christmas by Haig. I ended up buying this book because it's got great little illustrations in it. Those were definitely a highlight of this book. This beautiful map, it's really good. Unfortunately, the illustrations seem to mirror the story, where the majority are in the front half and the back half is more story, and a story that I didn't really enjoy. This is about Nicholas and how he becomes Father Christmas, and the beginning is very cute when he's a kid and he's going on an expedition to find his dad, who was going to be investigating where the elves lived, but he didn't come home in time. But sort of once you meet the elves, spoiler, I feel like it goes downhill and it goes on weird tangents, and it isn't as sweet or cozy as the first half was. Haig has got great writing. There's some fun moments in here, but I was just disappointed that it went downhill. I know being critical of a children's book isn't great, but that's what I got. I also watched the trailer for the movie that's on Netflix, and it looks like they changed quite a bit, so maybe I'll watch that and see how the two compare. Though it is now January, so I guess it'll wrap around until this December. I gave this 3 stars. Then let's do a transition. A book that is a Christmas book, but also a thriller, is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This technically takes place on the 23rd of December, so it's a Christmas book. This is definitely a booktube darling that I have been wanting to get to for a long time. It's about this girl, Darby, who is driving home to see her sick mother, but there's a snowstorm on the way and she has to pull off at a rest stop. And there are a couple other people there, and she discovers that there is a child locked in the back of one of the vehicles. And she has to figure out who done it and how to protect the child and herself and make it until morning when the roads will be clear. It all takes place over one night, and in one location, and it's great. Like, I don't want to disparage this. It's very unique. It is well done for what it is, but I found it exhausting. So you discover the kid in the back of the van within the first 30 pages or something. And then from there it's at 100, and it stays at 100 the whole time, which is fun, but also exhausting. I feel like, I don't know if it's a good suggestion, but that you should read it all in one go, because maintaining that tension is really impressive. But I didn't do that. I read it over 3 days, I think. So every time I would pick it up, I'd be like, okay, we're at 100, get hype. And there were no like dips in the tension. It was just like go, go, go the whole time. It needed some sort of flashbacks or something to break it up, which it kind of did, but those flashbacks were also like at 100. This book also ended up being a lot more graphic than I was expecting. I expected the worst thing to be that there was a child locked in a cage, but no, it gets worse than that, so just be forewarned. But I ended up really enjoying it. I think it was a really impressive feat to maintain that kind of tension for so long. And the story is interesting. There's some good twists. It's action-packed, like packed. Like action is spilling out of the top. It's really enjoyable, and I can definitely see why so many people recommend it. It's unlike anything that I've ever read, though it did stress me out a lot. I gave it 4 stars. Continuing with the thrillers, I read Never Saw Me Coming by Vera Kurian. This was a really interesting book. It is about a psychopath who gets a free ride to university to participate in this study. And they wear wristbands that they have to take like mood assessment things on to like figure out how they feel throughout the day. But then one of the students in the study winds up murdered. And of course, none of them trust each other. They're not supposed to know who the other students in the program are, but you know, you're reading from a few perspectives right off the bat. And I did really enjoy this book, but what I struggled with was that it is primarily them investigating. There's very little time spent on these people's personal lives. It's basically all case focused. And even when like an event is happening that does some stuff for the character's backstory or personality or whatever, it is still based in the case. Not that that's a problem, it's just not usually something I enjoy. Like reading from a detective POV, this is sort of bridging the gap between those. But I thought the writing was really interesting. I really enjoyed what the author has to say. She has a PhD in social psychology, so she knows what she's talking about. I didn't love the ending. I didn't hate it, but it's not what I expected. I'll say that. But I would still recommend this. I think that it lived up to my expectations. This is the author's debut too, so I will definitely be keeping an eye out on her. I gave this 4 stars. Did I give everything 4 stars? It feels like I gave everything 4 stars. Speaking of another thing I gave 4 stars, the last thriller is 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. This I heard touted as the first COVID book. I don't actually know if that's true, but it was published early 2021 and takes place from like March 1st to 56 days, May 1st, 2020 in Ireland. I think that this did end up living up to its premise. You know, because a COVID book feels very gimmicky, but I think that the story does a good job of justifying why this story has to be set during COVID. I don't think it could really work outside of that, which I really appreciate. It's a story about this couple who meet at the beginning of March and they like each other, but then lockdown happens and they're like, why don't we just live together? And then you're also reading from a future timeline where the cops have discovered a dead body in the apartment. This one really surprised me because it starts off really slow, but the payoff is totally worth it in the end. It is definitely a bit confusing because there's quite a few timelines going on. So there's now, which is when the detective is investigating, and then 56 days ago when the girl is telling her story of like how they met. But then you start jumping like 56 days ago, 18 days ago, 24 days ago. Like it's a lot to keep track of. So if you're not great at that, just be forewarned. But I think it did a good job of differentiating it for the most part. and it had some really fun twists that I really enjoyed. I've had this book on my TBR for the whole year, and I'm really glad that I ended up reading it. Did I mention 4 stars? It was 4 stars. The last category, I don't really know what it is. There's romance mostly, but then some sci-fi fantasy stuff in there. Let's go from most realistic, I guess, to least realistic. I read After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This, I haven't ventured into Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist, like back before 7 Husbands. This is the first one that I did, and had been on my radar since before I knew that like Taylor Jenkins Reid was a big deal. It's the story of Lauren and Ryan, who are having a rough patch. The beginning of the book goes through their history of their 11-year relationship, how they met and wedding, blah, blah, blah. And then present day, they're not having a good time, so they decide to take a year-long break. This book I enjoy in theory, but I think in execution it leaves something to be desired. I think the biggest problem is that I didn't connect with any of the characters, and it's such a character-driven story that you need that. But I enjoyed a lot of what it had to say. It was basically talking about like how your relationship can take many forms, and whatever form works for you, that's okay. She has 2 siblings who both have very different relationships from what she has, and sort of coming to terms with that, but none of the characters really did anything for me. I didn't dislike them, they just were sort of flat. I think that if you enjoy Taylor Jenkins Reid, you will enjoy this, but it's definitely a draft version of like, you can see how this will become 7 Husbands and Daisy Jones, but it's not quite there yet. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read A Full Love Story by Lone Lee. This is the story of 2 competing Vietnamese restaurants and their kids who fall in love. It's a Romeo and Juliet kind of story. I did enjoy it. There's lots of cute moments in it. They team up to write something for the school paper, and I thought that was really fun. But then there start being like reveals about how the families have history with each other that was never mentioned, and it went a little off the rails for me. It's a YA contemporary romance, so of course I'm not expecting the most out of it. I gave it 3 stars. It was definitely fine. Sort of the definition of a fine book. Then I read The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole. Alyssa Cole is a really interesting author. I read When No One Is Watching, I think that's what it's called, last year by her, which is a thriller, and this is more of a romance, but from the cover you think it's going to be more of a romance than it is. It actually focuses quite a bit on the sci-fi aspect. So it follows this girl who is living in the future where everything is controlled by the Hive, which is a Google, Amazon government conglomerate. It focuses quite a bit on how that affects her daily life, and then there's a boy living across the hall from her, and we know he's an AI. She doesn't know that he's an AI, and we get some insight into the workings of his mind and how he grows as a person and stuff, and it's really interesting. I definitely didn't expect it to go where it went. It goes very sci-fi. The romance in here is like hardly anything, but like there are reveals in this book that 1, I didn't think there would be any reveals, and 2, I definitely did not see coming. So Alyssa Cole is just like a chameleon of an author. I have no idea what she's gonna do next, but it's all super high quality work. I was just looking at my Goodreads because I didn't remember if I rated it 3 or 4 stars. Apparently I rated it 3, but I didn't write a review, which is very unlike me. I think it was more the off the rails nature of it, like the story, like it didn't have a clear narrative objective to it. It was fun, but 3 stars though could go into a 4. Maybe I just rate everything 4 stars and it's not the book's fault. But we are ending with something that I definitely did not give 4 stars. Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This is a 5-star read. I have to show it off every time. I don't care if you're sick of it. The beautiful Illumicrate edition that I got with the sprayed edges and the under the dust jacket art is just, it's incredible. This book is cruel and awful, and I hate TJ Klune, but I love him so much. The best part about this book is that it's exactly what I wanted it to be. Like every beat that it hit, I was like, this is where I pictured it going in my mind from the pitch of this. It's about a man who dies and is transported to the ferryman's house by a reaper, and the ferryman is going to help him cross to the other side through the whispering door. And my leg's asleep. This is perfect. It's such an incredible story. So Wallace is the man who dies. He's a curmudgeon-y lawyer, and you know, gradually learns to be less curmudgeon-y. It is also gay. There is so much thought and care put into this book. So it's all talking about death and grief in various ways. There's a author's note at the beginning. There are discussions of death in different forms, quiet, unexpected, and death by suicide. So be warned of that before going in. Also the death of a child. But it is such a hopeful story too. There's a bunch of people who live at the ferryman's house, and they are such a cute little found family. There's a ghost dog. There's a ghost dog, which incidentally does mean that there is description of dog death in here, but then he's a ghost, so it's fine. When I tell you that this book had me sobbing, you don't understand. Like, it was hard. There are a couple of things in here that are really hard. Nelson's wife destroyed me. Cameron destroyed me. The kid destroyed me. Like, naturally, the kid death is not fun. I was reading Goodreads reviews after I finished it, just to be like, who dares to not give this 5 stars? And there was someone who was talking about the manager who is like in charge of the ferryman, and the review said, you know, I never really got the manager. And it's like, yeah, he's an unknowable being. You don't get him. Which I think is like my perfect level of magic in here, where like you understand 80% of what's going on. Like, I understand the function of the manager, but he is still an immortal, unknowable, godlike being. But I don't need the ins and outs of that. There's magic that doesn't have to be explained, I guess is the best way of saying it. There's some really funny moments in here. I do wish the ending had done something different, but I totally understand why it didn't. And I'm just thrilled that the inside of this matches the outside. I can't believe it. This is definitely a new favorite of all time, but it's also so hard to recommend because it's like, do you want to be depressed for 370 pages? Because I do. But if it sounds like something that you could enjoy and are in the right headspace for, I can't recommend it enough. And I can't believe that this is the follow-up to Cerulean Sea, which like blew everyone away and is so many people's favorite book of all time that he managed to get 2 in a row, and I can't wait to see what his next book is. So there you go, the final wrap-up of 2021. It was a great way to go out. I read everything 3 stars and above, which is really exciting. Definitely didn't read as much as I did the previous month. I'm going to blame that on Spider-Man. I saw the movie and then have been playing the video game nonstop since. And I'm a completionist, so I had to 100% it, of course. But January is a whole new year and lots of fun stuff coming up. My best and worst books will be up this week, so subscribe if you want to see those. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you on Tuesday. Bye!